I, O, and U. These are letters that can be used as connecting vowels in Latin, when you form medical terms, using Latin root words, as we're doing starting in Lesson 8 in medical terminology, and also we'll be doing for Lesson 9. So keep this in mind. Those different connecting vowels came up, for instance, in a term on the homework for Lesson 8, auricula. Okay, this was the root from the word for ear, auris. I was the connecting vowel. Cula is actually what we call a diminutive suffix. Latin has a couple of these. Diminutive suffix. Another one that we saw was in the word capitulum. There's a suffix. And that's the root from the word for head. And there's no need there, though, for a connecting vowel. So, another word I just wanted to point out too from Lesson 8 that a couple of people had some questions about was the word sanguine. That's from sanguis, which means blood. It's combined with a suffix, ine, which was actually in Lesson 8. So Lesson 8 actually did introduce you to some Latin suffixes. Didn't make that really clear at the moment, but that was actually happening back in Lesson 1. So blood plus ine, this suffix means an agent or a substance, and you combine them, well, one of the I's falls out. So that was a tricky question, I have to admit. And then a couple times on the homework for Lesson 8, there were quite a few terms. For instance, bursae, fistula, viscus. These are actually, synovia. These are actually Latin words that have made it into English. So they're actual Latin words. There's no combining forms or really you can speak of or suffixes or prefixes that were added. They're simply words that we take in hook, line, and sinker from Latin and use them in English. So that's why there was no need to actually break them up. So that's something that's a little bit more confusing. There's a tendency to do that more with English than with Greek words. Now, moving on to Lesson 9. Lesson 8 was about Latin nouns. So a word, for instance, like bursae, yes, was a Latin noun. So was a word, well, we have another word in Lesson 9, fungi, meaning fungi. These are actually Latin words. They're both in the plural. We talked a little bit last time with Lesson 8 that in Latin, you make a noun plural by changing its ending. This indicates the different kinds of endings. So what we are looking at with Lesson 9 is verbs. And verbs in Latin are special creatures. One of the confusing things about verbs in Latin is that they change their forms when you conjugate them, when you put them into different tenses. Just as in English, to use an example, I would say I go in the present tense. In the past tense, I say I went. So a very different form. Or we might also say I speak, but I spoke. And notice here there's a total change in the form of the word. In other English words, verbs, there's a change of the vowel, but other parts of the word, the SP and the K, stay the same. So in Latin, most verbs can use one of 4 different forms. We call those 4 different forms the principal parts of a Latin verb. Principal parts. So one example would be the word for to lead, duco. That means I lead. Ducere, to lead. It's what we call the infinitive. Duxi, I led, or I have led. It's the past tense form. I lead, to lead, I led. And then another form, ductum, or sometimes seen as ductus with a US. This is something called the perfect passive participle, and I am writing it in purple. That was not intentional. Perfect passive participle. A participle is a verb that's used as an adjective. Perfect indicates that it's in a certain tense, the past tense. Passive indicates something that we call voice, whether a verb is active or passive. A simple example of that would be, I lead a horse to water. The horse is led to water. So the horse is led to water would be a passive verb. Passive versus past tense. If that sort of went in one ear, not the other, that is okay. For what you need to know for Chapter 9 in learning the combining forms is that Latin verbs have different forms, and you need to learn the ones that are listed in the book under the combining form column. Now, in some cases, this means that things can be a little confusing, but I guess that's nothing new for this class, right? Dear. Okay. This is an example. So, our book actually gives us the example of duke or duped. This can mean to lead, so that occurs in words like conduct. Or another example would be black pen. There's another verb in Latin, facio. It means to do or to make, and so the combining forms that you have to learn are fac, F-I-C, fic, and fet. Okay, we see this in words like infection, has that F-E-C-T, infection, so it's F-A-C, fac, fic, and fet. Often this verb facio, which means to do or to make. So again, English words can be infection. The English word factory, a place where things are made, comes from the fac part of the verb. And another word, fiction, something that's made up. That comes in the fic part of the verb. So that's one to keep in mind. There is also a verbal suffix ending, fy, that means to make something. And I would just add that into your book as something else to learn in learning this combining form, facio, fac, fic, fect, meaning to make. An example of adding this phi to make a word would be the word magnify, to make phi something big, magnus. So just something else to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind with this combining form, fac, meaning to make. Well, there is also a word right below it in the vocabulary, which is from the Latin word facies, which means a face. And does give us the English word for face, and is going to give you a little bit of confusion, right? Facies. Well, the combining forms for you are faci, fici, and facies. And all of these forms, as the book points out, mean the English word face. So, or appearance, or a surface. So that's something else to keep in mind. In Latin, these are extremely distinct words. I know I have a verb versus the noun, the word make versus face, but that's something you should absolutely keep in mind. And another combining form to keep in mind as you're working on the lesson 9 vocabulary is fare, which actually means to carry. A good example to me is a ferry that you can take over the Hudson River. A little bit confusing though is that fare has another form, which is lot, L-A-T, and that also means to bear or to carry. I know it doesn't look like that, but all students who take Latin have to struggle with this word and thinking that these two words mean the same thing. Maybe it helps. In Greek, was a word that we also learned for. This also means to bear or to carry, and etymologically, they're actually from the same root. Now we're starting to get into a word about lesson about Indo-European linguistics. I will leave you with that. Good luck with Latin verbs, and good luck with the Latin roots. I think some of you found that some of the homework for lesson 8 was a little more challenging than some things in the past. So let me know if you need some extra tips to do it, or if you have questions. You know where to find me on email and Google Chat. And have a good week.